Former BBC correspondent and host of the Newsagents podcast, Jon Sopel, joins us now. You've worked with Huw for a long time. Have you spoken to him since all this happened?
We've had contact, obviously not since he's been hospitalised. He was very angry, I think felt very let down by, what happened in The Sun, furious with their coverage, not overly impressed with the BBC's coverage either. And I think that he is just, I'm sure anyone who knows him is just wishing him well. I mean, Huw, I have known for over 3 decades when we were young political correspondents competing against each other to get up the ladder at the BBC. And, he is incredibly funny, has got an acid wit. He can be a complicated person to deal with.
In what way?
I just think that Huw, if you're entering Huw's orbit, he's very defensive of his own territory. So I wouldn't say we're close friends, but I thought that some of the coverage about what has happened, about someone's private life, which is complicated and possibly a bit messy, and that some might find distasteful, I don't see what it's got to do with anyone else if there's no question of illegality, there's no question of sexual assault. And things might change, but as things stand now, there's been no illegality, there's been no abuse of power as far as I can see. And therefore, I think, well, what is it to do with anybody?
Jon, you're a journalist and a broadcaster, and you will have covered millions of stories, hundreds and thousands of stories over the years. The argument that it is in the public interest is that he works for the BBC, he's paid by the taxpayer, and there is an interest in this part of his life that made it valid for The Sun to run the story.
Sure, but I think the parameters have changed. I think when I look back at, when I was a young political correspondent, an MP would be outed and it would be a page 1 splash for being gay because that was not seen as acceptable or whatever. I think things have moved since then. And I think we've had 2 very recent cases, one here with Philip Schofield, now this one at the BBC, where you say, OK, it may not have been wise what I've done. It may not be great. It may not, people might not like it. But what is it to do with anyone else?
Well,
and I think that is the question that comes back. Yeah, go on.
Well, I suppose what the case is that the nature of that job that he had was holding people to account for all sorts of things. And therefore, the argument I imagine The Sun will put, don't work for The Sun, don't know anything of their thinking, but I imagine the argument that they might put, and I'm sure they sat down and debated it endlessly, is that in that situation, if something hasn't been followed up, if something hasn't been acknowledged for whatever reason, if something hasn't been addressed, and they're there holding others to account, then it becomes of public interest, doesn't it?
Well,
they might argue that they need to be held to account in the sense they perhaps need to own it, if it's true, don't know, and all those things need to be addressed. Would you say that?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that Huw has not stood on a pulpit. He has not gone on a platform and said, vote for me because I stand for this. Mm-hmm. Huw has tried to keep his own life as far away from the public view as possible. He carries on with his life. When he's on screen, he's incredibly professional. As I say, I think the appearance of him on screen, which can sometimes be utterly professional but a little bland, is not who Huw Edwards is. If he had been proselytising for a certain lifestyle and then was found to have fallen short, then fair enough, he's fair game. But as I say, if there's no bullying, if there is no illegality, if there is no sexual misconduct, and, who knows, fresh allegations may come out and that may change things altogether. But at the moment, The Sun, I think, I don't know what the editorial discussions were at The Sun, because it looked to me, when I saw that story on Saturday, and you thought, wow, takes your breath away, gasp, who is the BBC presenter? And you expect to go to pages 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. There was very little. And I think because there was no naming of the individual, I think the legal threshold was lower to publish. And I'm not sure that they did have everything, every duck in a row, which you would normally expect on a big investigation like that.
The allegation is inappropriate behaviour bordering on bullying, and that would be sort of what people are saying now with regards to sort of the scenario and where Huw was.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's see. I mean, there's, Tim Davie, the Director-General of the BBC, has said that they're going to carry on the investigation. And let's see where that lands. At the moment, you know, the police have said there was no illegality. He is in hospital.
Yeah.
I think the millions of people who've watched him on TV do coverage of all sorts of events with great dignity will just think, you know, I wish you well, I hope you get better.
Do you think this could be, or this might well be, a watershed for sort of the tabloid press and private lives of people who are in the public eye?
I think there are a number of people in the tabloid press, and dare I say it, in BBC News, who need to give themselves a good, hard look in the mirror over the coverage, over the alacrity with which they have gone into someone's private life, and it hasn't been clear what the issue is other than that private life is a bit messy. And I really hope that there is a pause for reflection on the way some of this coverage has gone, because I think it got ugly. I think it became a feeding frenzy. I think it was competition to who could go furthest, fastest. And, you know, hearing kind of last night that, you know, the news that, I mean, you reported it, Kate, you said in your introduction that the Sun was not going to reveal anything more. Then you hear on BBC News, and we've got fresh allegations that he approached people in an inappropriate or flirtatious way, and you think, whoa, the guy's in hospital.
Yeah. How does this... You no longer work for the BBC. How do you think the BBC... What's your take on how the BBC have handled it? No doubt it's caused a huge number of stress and trauma for lots of individuals within the BBC as it's unfolded. Where do you think it's sort of gone wrong? Are there questions about safeguarding individuals? Are there questions about safeguarding Huw himself? What is the situation?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I used to get asked, you know, I'd say to people, I work for the BBC, and they say, oh, which bit of the BBC do you work for? And I'd say, I work for the B, not the C. And I'm a broadcaster, I'm not part of the corporation. Tim Davie...
What do you see as the difference? People might not understand
because I think that the corporation says... I mean, on Tuesday, it was a classic example. Tim Davie announces when he does an interview, and it was the day of the annual report of the BBC, he says, because of the Metropolitan Police inquiry, we're going to stop our investigation into Huw Edwards, or as then the unnamed presenter.
At one point, that was because he was under the impression, certainly, and it was certainly reported as such, that the Met Police asked him to.
Yeah, sure. So the Director General announces we're stopping the investigation. And then, kind of an hour later, the BBC announces it's stepping up a news investigation and is going to broadcast it. And you think, now, does the one arm not know what the other arm is doing? Actually, I think the BBC News is so keen to stress its independence from the corporation that you end up with an utterly dysfunctional relationship whereby the BBC starts to eat itself. And not satisfied with eating one arm, it will then eat the other arm. And I think there's some of that has gone on.
John...
The other argument that's been put... Sorry, Ben. The other argument is that The Sun has a history of publishing stories that aren't particularly pro-BBC. They might say it's in the public interest and they need to do that. Do you think there's any element of that involved in this?
I don't know about that. Look, you know, The Sun has got a long record. Rupert Murdoch's views on the BBC, on the licence fee, are clear. But it's a tabloid newspaper, and a lot of the time its reporting is rock solid and, you know, and very, very thorough. And I've got friends who've worked on the Sun newspaper who work at the Sun, and I think that, you know, you may not like the product, but they are damn good journalists who work there and are very thorough. This one, it just struck me, was kind of... I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. They took it out the oven when it was half-cooked.
So we're nearly out of time. The most important thing for Huw Edwards now is that he can recover his health and he can get back to health. But what does this mean for him professionally, John? Do you see a way back?
I don't know. I mean, I think if at the end of this, what you are left with is someone who had some personal struggles about who he was, what he was, how he lived his life, and he made some ill-considered judgments along the way, I think it would be such a shame if such a talented and gifted broadcaster, and the way he navigates state occasions and the big events and reads the news with such authority, if that is lost, I think that would be a great loss. So I hope he gets better, and I hope that somehow, he's back, providing that nothing else comes out that we don't know about. But if things are as they are, I hope he makes a return.